everyone, and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for the City of Hayward for June 27th, 2024. We're holding a hybrid meeting with some participants in the council chamber and others who have joined virtually via Zoom. This meeting is being webcast on Comcast TV Channel 15 and live streamed on the city's YouTube channel and on the city's website. Can we please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Fung, will you please take roll call?
Thank you. Commissioner Stevens?
Present.
Commissioner
Present.
Goodbody?
Present.
Commissioner Franco-Clausen?
Here.
Commissioner Patterson?
Present.
Commissioner Myers?
Present.
Chair Lowe?
Here. Thank you. The public comment section provides an opportunity to address the Planning Commission on items not listed on the agenda. The Commission welcomes comments and requests that speakers present their remarks in a respectful manner within established time limits and focus on issues which directly affect the city or are within the jurisdiction of the city. As the Commission is prohibited by state law from discussing items not listed on the agenda, your item will be taken under consideration and may be referred to staff for further action. Speakers shall not use threatening, profane, or abusive language which disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of a commission meeting. The city is committed to maintaining a workplace free of unlawful harassment and is mindful that city staff regularly attend commission meetings. Discriminatory statements or conduct that is hostile, intimidating, oppressive, or abusive are per se disruptive to a meeting and will not be tolerated. Ms. Fung, do we have any public comments at this time?
Chair Lowe, there are none.
Thank you. At this time, I will close the public comment section and begin with the first item on the agenda, which is the work session on the proposed zoning text amendments to the Hayward Municipal Code related to supportive housing programs associated with implementation of the Hayward 2023 to 2031 housing element. Staff is asking the Planning Commission to provide feedback on staff's recommendations for this item. May we hear from city staff at this time?
Good evening, Planning Commission and Hayward community. I am Taylor Richard, an Associate Planner with the City of Hayward Planning Division. Tonight, I will be presenting some recommendations to implement actions within the Hayward 2023-2031 housing element actions related to the development of supportive housing. Before I cover the recommendations, I want to share some information on the project background. One of the main impetuses for this project is that California is currently in a housing and shelter crisis with approximately 171,000 people experiencing homelessness daily. Our community is affected by this crisis with approximately 512 people experiencing homelessness in Hayward, up 30% from 2022. In the past decade, the Hayward City Council has adopted several emergency resolutions to help address this growing issue. These resolutions have resulted in the development of Hayward's Navigation Center, approval of a transitional youth shelter, and the continual operation of many other shelters in Hayward. Many of these resolutions included the temporary suspension of local planning and zoning regulations as they currently represent barriers to creatively and meaningfully serving our unhoused population. The council also adopted the Hayward housing element, composed of goals, policies, programs, and actions to help meet our community's housing need. This project aims to fulfill several actions in the housing element. These actions include promoting alternative housing options, complying with several provisions of state law, reevaluating our regulation and processes for group homes, allowing supportive housing on properties owned by churches and public agencies, and exploring regulations to allow safe parking. To summarize, our overall goal of this project is to create a housing continuum supporting individuals from homelessness to all the way to market rate housing. We are in the beginning phase of this project. To date, we have conducted background research, started stakeholder engagement, and had a work session with the City Council on Tuesday. Following this work session, staff will draft regulations based on the feedback from the community, Planning Commission, and City Council. We anticipate having draft regulations available in early fall and adoption hearings in the winter. So far, the stakeholder outreach has involved community meetings with local service providers, affordable housing developers, educational facilities, and faith-based organizations, and internal meetings with staff from several departments. These meetings resulted in robust feedback, including a need for a wide range of supportive and transitional housing, a need for facilities with small independent living spaces, and the expansion of allowances for licensed group homes, and locating supportive housing near public facilities, grocery stores, medical services, and transit, and requiring supportive housing have wraparound services, 24-hour staff close by or on site, laundry facilities, showers, cooking facilities, internet, and locked storage. Based on our background research and this outreach, staff has drafted a series of recommendations to expand supportive housing options and create that continuum of housing in Hayward. The recommendations, which I'll share now, fall into 5 categories: general cleanup, single resident occupancies, safe parking, group homes, and shelters. The general cleanup recommendations are focused on clarifying the different housing uses and ensuring our regulations are consistent with state law. This includes having clear definitions for all our different housing types and condensing similar ones into one use. The next 4 categories of recommendations are focused on specific housing types, starting with single resident occupancies, also referred to as SROs. These are small units for an individual with independent and shared living facilities. Our outreach found that there is a great need for this housing type, especially for individuals transitioning out of homelessness or congregate living. Currently, SROs are only permitted in 1 zoning district, but we recommend allowing these in additional commercial and high-density residential districts with approval of an administrative use permit. The use permit allows us to add conditions of approval to minimize nuisances and revoke approval if needed. We are also proposing requiring a management plan that addresses the management and operation of the SRO, the rental procedures, the safety and security of the SRO, and building maintenance. Lastly, we propose drafting development standards related to the unit size, common space areas, and what facilities should be shared versus independent to ensure our SROs are consistent. Moving on to safe parking. Safe parking provides parking sites for people experiencing homelessness where they can legally park and stay in their cars overnight. Currently, safe parking is not permitted within any zoning district, and staff proposes allowing this use on properties owned by faith-based organizations or community-based organizations in specific zoning districts with an administrative use permit. As I previously stated, the use permit allows us to add conditions of approval and revoke said approval, which minimizes nuisances. Staff proposes requiring the sites have permanent bathroom, kitchen, and laundry facilities open to the Safe Park residents and drafting performance standards related to the hours of operation, the maintenance of the facility, and requiring vehicles to be operable. At the City Council work session on Tuesday, Council directed staff to explore removing additional barriers to Safe Park developments by allowing RVs and allowing temporary bathroom, shower, and laundry facilities. Moving on to group homes. Group homes are a congregate housing type, typically for individuals seeking permanent housing or individuals in need of additional care, such as seniors or children. There are 2 types of group homes, licensed and unlicensed. Licensed group homes require a thorough permitting process with the California Department of Social Services. Currently, licensed and unlicensed group homes with 6 or fewer residents are permitted by right within all of our zoning districts, residential zoning districts. We are proposing to allow additional residents by right for licensed group homes and allow additional residents with an administrative use permit for unlicensed group homes. Moving on to shelters and low barrier navigation centers. Shelters and low barrier navigation centers are currently allowed in industrial zone districts on city-owned land, in certain zoning districts along Mission Boulevard, and in the general commercial zoning district with a conditional use permit. Staff recommends allowing this housing type in additional commercial and mixed-use districts near existing encampments. Furthermore, we propose developing development standards related to the number of beds, parking, waiting/intake areas, length of stay, proximity to other shelters, on-site management, lighting, security, and locked storage. That concludes my presentation and all of staff's recommendations. At the City Council work session, they expressed support for all of these recommendations, and as I shared, they requested additional flexibility for safe parking. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have about the recommendations or this project, and tonight I would appreciate the feedback from the Planning Commission, specifically on the following questions. Does the Planning Commission support staff's recommendations? Are there any other operational or performance standards that should be included or excluded from the housing types discussed today? And are there any other recommendations or regulations staff should consider while we draft the zoning amendments? Thank you.
And thank you for that presentation. We really appreciate it. I would like to open the floor for my fellow planning commissioners to ask questions at this time. Does anyone have any questions? Commissioner Goodbody.
Thank you, Chair Lowe. Thank you, Mr. Shard, for that very thorough report. And thank you for answering my question earlier in the comments that I submitted. So with regard to the the second questions are the recommendations staff should consider when drafting the zoning regulations. I think as I'm reading through the whole report, I kept coming back to the impacts that implementation might bring to our water and sewer infrastructure and also to our public safety with regards to the safe parking, with the housing types that we are going to be implementing. So in drafting the regulations, in discussing these applications, have there been considerations? For example, was there outreach and discussions with, our maintenance department and with our police and fire about just response calls? I'm concerned about the response times, about this, taxing the 911 system, which is already pretty impacted. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, so as part of those internal stakeholder meetings, we did meet with police and fire and our utilities department to discuss, what parameters they wanted to see to make sure we were meeting their regulations. Generally speaking, they were supportive of allowing additional options as long as there was those, performance standards in the code where our code enforcement department could enforce and we could make sure that there were limitations on the uses.
And then in terms of the SROs, and I think this may have been mentioned during the City Council meeting, but I would like to see in the implementation or when you're drafting the regulations to really first look at what stock we have right now. And I'm thinking of some of the hotels and motels that maybe need some refurbishing that can be refurbished or turned over at a reasonable cost to the city to kind of use that infrastructure as SROs and maybe adapt them to for families as well. So I would look to those. Then I would also look to putting some of these housing types or zoning in transit-rich areas, which I'm sure that you've heard before.
Yes, definitely that's what we're considering. Based on City Council's feedback, I already wrote some notes that we would look to allow SROs where we currently already allow hotels and motels. Obviously, we don't start projects, but having it already allowed in the same districts where hotels are allowed would allow that conversion to occur if a developer would want to do that.
Okay, and then also just, I would also include, to the extent that we can partner with our transit agency, particularly with BART, on land that they own, that they are, perhaps maybe have excess property or that they're looking to repurpose, would also, I think, be beneficial.
Yeah, we can look into that. The City Council made a similar comment and we'll reach out to them.
And then my last comment was just about the group homes. I kind of want to understand, I'm seeking to understand how we are moving towards allowing more unlicensed homes. It seems like something that's not, I know historically, I, worked in the state legislature for many years. Historically, we've had, have problems, understaffed inspectors, and so I know there's been legislation to kind of improve that and coordinate the monitoring of these homes and stuff, but I'm wondering if we can prioritize the licensed home first or grandfather some of the smaller homes up to getting a license before we zone some into the unlicensed properties.
So currently, we allow licensed and unlicensed group homes, and state law requires us to allow, in all areas where single-family residents are allowed, to allow 6 or fewer residents in unlicensed or licensed group homes. What we're looking to do with our recommendations is already increase the capacity for licensed group homes because they already have that rigorous permitting process, and putting in 3 tiers for the unlicensed group homes. So keeping that 6 threshold for by right, but then creating an administrative use permit segment for those who want to middle around, and then creating an upper segment for a conditional use permit to create flexibility. Currently, our code just has 2. It says 6 or fewer by right, 6 or 7 or more CUP. So we're just creating that 3rd tier for that mid-size group home.
Thank you. So we'll, through this, the timeline, it's, and I don't remember which phase of this entire process, but will there be an opportunity for the commission to look at maybe suggest, make some recommendations for performance standards for the operators of the, of some of these facilities, or is that another department, or?
We can set performance standards for these different uses. That's what we're looking for tonight, some feedback. We will bring back draft regulations, which will be staff's recommendation about what performance standards and development standards we should have for these things, and then the Planning Commission will be given the opportunity to comment on the draft standards at that point, and then we'll come back one final time for our recommendation for adoption.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. So I just have a couple quick questions. So according to the report, there was 512 homeless people found in the last census, I believe.
This was based on the last point in time count, which occurred in early January, where the city staff and volunteers survey the city by census block.
So if the population of the city is like 157,000, that represents about 1/3% of the population. It's a very small group. So the second thing is all these proposals, I mean, how is health care and substance abuse, I mean, who's doing that?
So we talked to several of our service providers through the outreach process, and that's why some of our recommendations say including wraparound services. Most of these uses have wraparound services for mental health, or they have people who come in and service their residents for either health care or other things. So those are kind of integrated in those wraparound services because we know this population needs additional support in those areas.
So this might be a very difficult question to answer, but if you look at Oakland or San Francisco or maybe Fremont, you see very large concentrations of homeless folks. You don't see that so much in Hayward. By doing these things and providing these opportunities, you encourage folks to relocate to this community.
Was it a question?
Yeah, that's a question.
What was the question?
The question is if you create opportunities and resources, do you encourage folks to relocate to this city?
Respectfully, we have our housing division manager who can speak to the services that we're providing. However, the regulations that we're putting forth are here to service the individuals that live in this community and that need housing throughout the region. Do you want to take any?
So I think we'll have more data on that as they just finish the point in time count. We have information that's really on a high level at this point, but we'll have more Hayward-specific information related to the homeless population in the city of Hayward. And part of that is a survey of where people lived prior to being homeless. I do know that I've had some conversations with it. At times it's hard to tell where they initially became homeless because it's been such a long time. But there's been data in previous point in time counts that showed that people who are experiencing homelessness most of them originate from the area where they're experiencing homelessness.
Thank you. So a lot of this this compliance would require supervision by, I presume, code enforcement of the city?
Yeah, we are requiring for most of the proposed housing types, requiring a use permit, which gives code enforcement the ability to enforce our conditions of approval. And if a nuisance does arrive, it does allow us to revoke said approval.
I guess my question is does the city have the resources available to enforce this?
I can't speak to like staffing or capacity, but our code enforcement team is well qualified and able to respond to calls for service, and they get to it in the manner that they come in.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Franco-Clausen?
I want to thank you again for the report. And I sort of want to piggyback what I just heard from both of my colleagues here. I actually lived in a group home here in Hayward when I was younger, and I can tell you from lived experience that a lot of kids that grow up in foster care, they age out into homelessness, and they do stay close to the communities in which they have grew up in or lived because it's familiar to them. They don't seek to leave because that's comfort. The unlicensed one is where I also had just some questions, and I think it's valid because if you've never lived in a group home, which I'm not sure if any of my colleagues have, there's good ones and bad ones, and with no oversight and no implementations with consistent oversight, a lot of bad things happen, even in some of the recovery homes I work with here in Hayward. I have a lot of meetings as I have a lot of relatives that are unhoused that live here, Oakland, Vallejo, and with that, I think to his point is that who's going to monitor and manage just the expectations, but how do we encourage? I think this is a great idea. I'm actually all for it because unless you have that experience, you don't know the services and the housing that you need to become stable again. Is that something that we in partnership with there's so many organizations, and this is actually, when it comes to social services comes through the county. So having partnerships with the mental health department, social services, child welfare, and they get lots of money to do this. Is that something that was considered in partnership with the county and organizations that already exist in this community to be able to have those wraparound services? So we're not reinventing the wheel. They already exist. Our tax dollars already pay for them in the process of creating the additional housing that we need, because we do need it. There's a lot of kids that age out of foster care. They're in the justice system. They're returning citizens that can't get housing, and that's why you see them roaming your community, and it's really not easy to access. I just did a video of me calling as someone homeless to show people the impact it has when you send people this way, they never get housing. So will we have a support system to go alongside that to make sure that when we offer it, we rezone and we say we provide it, we also have to make sure that people are getting exactly what they need when we say we do these things? Thank you.
Yeah, we can look into operational or performance standards for unlicensed group homes or some capacity of that. Our community service department is responsible for providing services. It's not in the purview of the planning department, so they kind of look and make sure. But speaking with many of our service providers, many of them which operate group homes, they do tie into those other services and have them come to site rather than having that person go to the service. And so there's already that kind of synergy happening in Hayward.
Thank you.
Commissioner Myers?
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple pages of questions here, but I'll try to be brief. I'll try to consolidate where I can. So I wanted to talk about the safe parking. I know you mentioned that council was talking about maybe allowing portable restrooms. That's my first comment is, I know that we state the restrooms have to be set in place, kitchens and laundry. What I'm hoping is that we cannot make the kitchens and laundry a mandatory necessity, because if they don't have a laundry or a kitchen, we're not going to see their laundry around our sidewalks. But if they don't have a bathroom, we're going to see that on our sidewalks. And I was one of the few fortunate people in a large worldwide company to govern large events. And what we would do is we would bring in trailers of 3 or 4 restrooms, a couple 30-amp receptacles, and they were good to go forever, and then just a weekly cleaning, or depending on the population. Especially since we've kind of declared a state of emergency. You know, I think if we had like a hurricane on the East Coast and we did a state of emergency, but we said, hey, you got to wait till you get a hard plumbed bathroom, I think the trailer would work perfectly in that situation. So that's my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I'll just add, we're going to look into that based on council's feedback. What our intention is that these be on sites with already development, like church-owned properties or nonprofits, where they have already a plumbed bathroom. So providing access to it shouldn't be a financial burden, but we're looking into all of those options and considering them.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, perfect. And I think by not requiring it to be, like maybe it's an empty lot somewhere, we can do a portable restroom or something. And then my question was going to be after that, the same that Commissioner Stevens said, which was, if we have all these lots with all these bathrooms and parking spaces, are we now inviting all the neighborhood cities to come in? But is that something we've considered?
So lots of our surrounding cities already have safe park programs. So Union City, Fremont, Castro Valley, and San Leandro all already have established safe park programs with several locations. So I wouldn't anticipate that ours would bring the neighboring communities in, because they can already get those services in their community.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good. And then I think it said on one of the answers of the questions, we do not yet have a kind of a starting list of all of our possible spots for these parking?
No, so the point of these recommendations were to get a read from Planning Commission and Council, and we didn't want to create draft regulations if this was not something that Council or Planning Commission wanted to move forward. But in that next step, we'll have a list of zoning districts where we will propose allowing these.
Okay, perfect. And again, on that same note, motorhomes, I'm okay. You know, in my opinion, I think that would behoove us to add those. So I was looking at attachment 2 when it defines all of the different SRO and different property types. I didn't see a short-term shelter definition for our things such as a navigation center. Would that fall under a particular category?
So currently we are missing several definitions for uses, which is why the general cleanup includes having definitions for every single type of use. So a low barrier navigation center and a shelter will be defined in our draft regulations, but currently we do not have definitions for those.
Perfect. Okay, good. And how do I say this gently? I may not agree that we go to a bunch of old men behind the bench to ask about women's rights. In that same note, should we be asking the homeless for their comments on what they think they need and what could use best?
So we will have that point in time survey data, which will have surveyed the population. What we did, instead of burdening on our unhoused community, we went to the service providers who are day in and day out with these individuals and deeply understand their needs. And so we gathered the feedback from the service providers, and that is how we came to these draft regulations, or recommendations today.
Excellent, thank you. And that's page 1. I'll be quick here, I hope. I noticed that on page 2 of 8, it talked about the city has a goal of completing 5 tiny home developments. Do we know where those are? And are those developments of multiple tiny homes on each development, or is it just 5 tiny homes?
Can you say what page that was referenced on?
It's page 2 of 8, action 13.1.
So this is the action item. So the goal is that the city have 5 sites with tiny home villages. And this is our housing element goal. So this is what we're trying to get to. So we currently, as far as I'm aware, have 1 approved tiny home village,
Okay.
but none that are built and operational. Oh, two approved.
And I think that was my question, was the definition. It's not just 5 tiny homes. It's actually 5 villages we're hoping for at some point. Oh, cool. Okay, great. The other thing is, on page 6 of 8, we indicated requiring a management plan that addresses management and operational rental procedures, safety and security of residents to minimize potential nuisance. So we have a list. Who creates this list? Is that our group that does that?
For what the management and plan includes?
Like some of the management requirements for these properties?
Yeah, we will likely, because this is through an administrative use permit, require a management plan that has certain things, and then the company operating it can say how they're going to manage the property, and the planning commission, or the planning staff and planning department can look at those and make sure that they are adequately managing the property. And then our code enforcement department can enforce that management plan.
And would our input here be able to somehow influence some of the requirements?
We could do that through performance standards. So we're welcoming all comments on what performance standards you would be looking for SROs. So that's our mechanism in which to do
Okay.
it.
And just a quick history here. Years ago, my neighborhood, I live about a rock's throw away from the one on your page 6. And so a few years ago, a group of us were trying to make some alterations and changes to it. I'm sure, I won't say any names, but I'm sure Leah remembers that. And so we were trying to make some changes because of the demographic and stuff like that. And kind of nothing got changed. So what has changed since is it's now open and occupied. And then from my perspective, my paradigm has changed because I now have a son who's unhoused. So I'm looking at it through a whole different paradigm. I'm looking at it with a heck of a lot more compassion than I probably did years ago. But I'm also getting calls every week from neighbors about the current situation with the existing home. And for one instance is, we have one of the unhoused, the people who live in there, rides around 8 in the morning, midnight, whatever it is, with a boom box, full blast, and 2 unleashed Rottweilers. So I get calls on that all the time. And my wife walks our little puppies, and I'm worried somebody's going to really get seriously hurt. So are those kind of regulations we could impose? Like if you have a pet, you cannot be on the street with it unleashed and things like that?
I don't believe so. I think those are probably civil issues and not looking at development standards wise. We are, through performance standards, allowed to require staff be on site and be available, and or we can enforce our noise ordinance, which has caps about what the level of decibels you can have, but things that occur in the public right-of-way are more civil or criminal issues, and we do not have authority over those.
Because I think what I'm trying to do is, we all know about NIMBYism, and we all know the stigma that everybody feels with these shelters or these unhoused projects in everybody's neighborhood, and I'd like to find a way to completely remove that stigma and NIMBYism. But I think we can't, in my opinion, you can't just say, do what you want, and everybody in the neighborhood fight it out with the city. I feel like there's a certain responsibility we have bringing these homes into neighborhoods that can help to make everybody almost welcome them, because we know they're going to be governed and watched over. And once we can all welcome them, then we can have them everywhere and kind of start to solve this problem.
Yeah, for a couple past projects, just as like examples of things that the planning department has required. So one of the tiny home villages and one of our like senior facilities that has like a locked facility for those with developmental issues. We have required that like annually they send out a card of who to call, who's the staff person on site to everyone with like an 100-foot radius. So that way, instead of having to call the police department or having to call the fire department, that on-site manager is responsible for dealing with those issues, and the community knows who to call in the event that someone is causing a problem. So that's something we could probably look at like doing, requiring noticing to neighbors of like who is the responsible contact. But yeah, I think
Okay.
that's a suggestion, but we're all ears on other ideas.
And then the other note I have is it possible to include in those requirements maybe creating or allowing the creation of a neighborhood council that can, run ideas or work with them on a monthly or bi-monthly basis or whatever, just so that it can actually hear the needs of all of these neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think we could look into that. There have been like working groups. I don't think we've like ever required them, but like by Weeks Park, there's a working group, and along Mission Foothills, there's a working group with like local agencies and the service providers. So we could look into that. We just want to make sure that we're not requiring something that is like so burdensome that these don't
Right.
end up operating.
Right. Okay. I feel like finally there's something up here that I initially was very passionate about that I could speak my voice on. And I think in the past, I feel like we've always just said it's not our purview and we can't do that or we'll offend that. But there's got to be something to get rid of this stigma. And I think that's what we have to do, in my opinion, is get rid of the stigma so we can have more welcoming communities like this. So far, thank you for listening. And then as Commissioner Stevens said, we're up to 512, I think it is. Do we know why that number has jumped? And has it jumped in the same proportion as our neighboring cities?
So the point in time count data is all available online. Most cities did see a rise in the unhoused population. The factors are the same that's impacting everybody is, cost of living is increasing, the job market is tumultuous, people are losing their jobs. It's just the state of the United States right now and frankly the world. So there is just a lot of things that are creating the issues that result in homelessness. Also, the 500, it's important to note the 512 don't count those who are like couch surfing or those who we can't see or those other individuals that are, sharing a home and there's multiple people in there. So there are still a larger portion of our population that is also in need of housing that's just not on the street, but is very housing secure and is one lost paycheck away from ending up on the street. So I think it's important context to provide.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think you and Ms. Morales are perfect, and I'm so happy that you guys are kind of leading the charge here, and thank you very much for everything you do. And that's all for me.
Thank you, and thank you for answering those questions. Did you have something, Commissioner Patterson? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, staff, for the presentation and for answering some of my questions earlier, well, all of my questions. I have a couple of follow-ups. One is somewhat related to what was raised around your conversations that you had with the police force and maintenance department. Are you aware of any of the types of supportive housing that they're most concerned would potentially cause increased security or maintenance costs to the city? Or have they not really looked into that yet?
No, they did not express concern of any of the housing types. They are more concerned about like the existing encampments that exist and that costs on maintenance services and calls for service that those provide. I think they're open to these options because they provide an alternative place for these individuals to go.
I kind of have a follow-up to that, just because I'm surprised a little bit that they don't have more input on that. And so I get wanting the services and for us to have lots of options, but it does seem like it would be just somewhat helpful to know. So do you know if they do plan to do that in the future as more of this is developed?
What kind of services are you referring to?
Just in terms of which supportive housing options, like if they're zoned and we have regulations around them, are they going to be more in favor of certain ones than others based on those costs?
I talked to them and I asked them about like number of calls of service for like the NAV center and group homes and things like that, and they said they're generally pretty low. What they get calls for service for is most of like the unhoused population in downtown or along the tracks. Those are what takes up most of their services. So I think they understand that, and what we're really trying to do is all of these different housing types serve a different population. There's not a one-size-fit-all when it comes to housing. Some individuals need more intensive mental health care. Some individuals just, are transitional youth and need to be with other youth and with an adult present so they can find their way in life. So I think the array of housing and what our intention is, and I think what our service providers, city and the nonprofits organizations is that these all serve a different population, and it's not that like one of them is necessarily problematic. What we did hear from the police department is that it's less about the housing type and more about like the individuals in it. Sometimes one person can, make the whole facility unstable, and so it's just about, and then our service providers said it's just about like finding a better location for that individual.
Thank you. That's very helpful, just thinking about the future and the different projects that we may see in front of us, and just it's helpful context to understand. So thank you for that. My other question is really a follow-up again on the point in time survey, and I did ask the question about specifically Hayward youth, and it sounded like, and so I just want to get clarity because from something Ms. Morales said earlier versus something else that was said, it sounds like we don't have the Hayward specific data right now, but then I just heard that the data from the different cities is available online, so could you clarify?
Only the count is available for all the cities. The specific stuff from the survey or those is still aggregate. I believe our community service department says we will get the Hayward specific data as long as there is enough in that sample size for there to be a meaningful result made. But right now, because they did it in January and it took a couple months to get the data, we just have the total number of unhoused and unsheltered individuals in Hayward.
So just further point of clarity. So even though it was people from the city of Hayward who did that count, we don't have access to that data because we just had to turn it over and now it's part of the county's aggregate data?
Yeah, we all did it through this. I was part of the point in time count. I think Leo was too. It's like an app that you use, and so you just log the data into the app, and then it goes to the Alameda County coordinator, who's now working through that data and presenting it.
Thank you. I don't have any other.
All right, Commissioner Franco-Clausen has a question.
Just a follow-up. I think it was brought up, and I meant to ask. I actually met with the chief. My wife is a police officer, so I always have questions about what's happening when it comes to service calls. How many officers do we have? How many officers are we down? And while I don't like to stigmatize unhoused people as always being violent, we don't know their circumstances. But we do have a shortage of officers, and we do have a very long wait time. When we were having these conversations about exploring more housing than the different types, how would they respond to, if I call somebody for the sideshow that happens on Sleepy Hollow, I don't ever get a response. So how do we then justify having these new types of environments when we have a really, really kind of maxed out police department if they can't make the calls that are just for immediate help? It was just something that I just wanted to echo what both my colleagues had mentioned about that, because supportive housing, yes, these people sometimes don't want to be, they have this relationship with law enforcement that's not good, or, just the mental health components. There will be call for services. We'd have to be juvenile not to believe that. But implementing new housing, do we have the law enforcement component coupled with the mental health officers that are in so many other cities and counties to address that issue when it arises?
I obviously can't speak to staffing of any department, that's not in my purview, but what I did hear from officers is that the established, like, service providers, they do not get many calls for service for those ones, because those are operators, and what we heard from our service providers is they just don't have enough space to provide service for everybody that they want to. So creating these opportunities for service providers to set up additional locations and hire staff would, I believe, take burden off of our emergency services.
Well, on my block, Sleepy Hollow, we have about 2 group homes. We have a couple of senior living facilities. I don't see any calls for that. It's more the speeding and sideshows that are disrupting and making our neighborhood unsafe. So thank you.
All right, seeing no other hands, I'm going to ask I think I'll only have one question. And, well, everyone's asked all the questions, so, which is great. What I wanted to know is, I know that the cars have to be operable for the safe parking, but my question is, will there be regulations regarding how long they can park there? Like, can they park there all day and all night? What I'm concerned most about is someone living there 24/7 for a very long time, and then other people can't have a turn going in there.
So that's why we proposed having hours of operation, because it means individuals would have to leave at a certain time and then they could come back. The city council has wanted us to explore expanding the hours of operation, so we'll look into that. Our excellent deputy director told me about Union City's program. So Union City's our safe parking program has hours of operation. So in the morning, they ask everybody to leave and then they can come back at night, and it's a pretty successful model. So I think we'll be looking to kind of mirror some of our regulations on theirs.
I'm sorry, I do have a follow-up question. So would you be relying on, and I'm assuming, let's say it's a church or a nonprofit parking lot, would you be relying on the church administrators to regulate that?
Yeah, it would be a condition of approval, and the operator would have to enforce those hours of operation, and if they were not, then our code enforcement department would enforce that. Most of these service providers that operate, why we chose churches and other nonprofits, is they have services during the day, which means that they need their parking lot for those other services, which is why it kind of creates a good pairing of uses, because they rarely get used at night, but they need them during the day, so there is kind of that synergy there. And they already have like established bathrooms, and sometimes they have kitchens and other establishments. That was our idea. And the program in Union City is most of the safe park sites are at churches.
Thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate it. So at this time, the public is invited to comment on this item. Ms. Fung, do we have any public comments on this item?
There are none.
Thank you. At this time, I will close public comment, and now it's time for my colleagues to discuss the items. Do any of the commissioners wish to make comments about the items at this time? Commissioner Goodbody.
Thank you, Chair. I am in supportive of staff's recommendations, and I will be supporting the proposal tonight. I think I expressed my concerns about the unlicensed facilities, and so I'm willing to support it. The current unlicensed facilities that we have, the group homes, and that are allowed in statutes, but I am hesitant to support any further unlicensed facilities at this time.
And just to clarify, we are not asking for any action tonight. All we're asking for is feedback.
Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you. So I'm sorry, but it just, I fail to understand the logic of how this works. So we're creating land use policies around how nonprofit organizations treat a social problem. So according to the UCSF study, it looks like 82% of homeless folks have experienced a serious mental health condition in their lives. So we're going to change the way we regulate our neighborhoods in some aspects based on how nonprofit organizations operate. And we don't know the effectiveness of the nonprofit organizations. So if I think about this, this is a huge problem, and huge problems usually require leadership, and they require people, a huge movement by government to actually make an approach. So I'm not sure. I see why this is here, and I see why you're here, but I fail to understand the logic of how it got here. I fail to understand the logic of how council has initiated this when it affects, let's just say, 1% of the population. What about the other 99% of us that have to live in this city, and we have to look at all the things? To me, and from my perspective, there's a lot more consequential issues to deal with. So based on the actual actions that I have experience with, I'm against the safe parking. I believe that the city does not have the resources, code enforcement does not have the resources to enforce the conditional use permit that's associated with that. If I got that correct, it is a conditional use permit. I believe those will become nuisances. I think that the extension of group homes in residential neighborhoods, and I'm going to use the term single family, which I know is not consistent any longer, but I think that is completely inappropriate. And I cite the examples in our neighborhood that has several of these that have been consistent problems for years. So those are the two things that I can speak of, and I'm completely against that. So thank you very much.
Do Commissioner Frankel-Clausen.
So again, thank you for putting this together, and I know we're just here to discuss and make recommendations. I think it's always tough, based off your lived experience, to understand some of the implications that are happening when we discuss housing and, the impacts of the people that live in it. But I think this is a great start to really increasing and taking stock into who actually lives here in Hayward, from the hills down to the water. I really appreciate all the recommendations. I think this stuff will come to us again. I mean, it's not the last time we'll see it. But I believe that all of us are community leaders, and we know great organizations and nonprofits and leaders who would love to invest some time and resources into Hayward, since we love it so much, to make sure that the supportive services that are necessary for some of the changes, are actually working, so we can remove some of the people that are living on the streets. I don't know if you drive down, how many of you drive down Hesperian a lot, but it's really painful to see teenage kids out there homeless, dealing with mental health. And it's consistent. You see the same 20 young people out there sleeping on the corners, sleeping at Home Depot. So if there's a chance that we can find some services and we can pull them into something to at least get them into programs and support from even the CARE Acts. I serve on the state board for the CARE Acts. Would be really incredible. So thank you again for these recommendations, and I would support all of them.
Commissioner Myers.
Thank you. So this is more of a question in the wrong spot instead of a comment. I forgot to ask, the Navigation Center over on White Cell, I believe has beds for 60, and I could be wrong on that number, but I think during COVID we dropped it down a lot. Could you tell me those two numbers? And also, are we back up to full on that?
I don't know the specific numbers. I can bring that about next time in a staff report from our Community Services Department. I do believe they have lifted their COVID restrictions, though, and they are back up to full capacity. But I don't think the full capacity is 60. I didn't think it was.
None of us know the exact number at
Okay.
this point, but I think it's less than 60
Okay.
capacity.
And from what I understand, it's going to be transferred in the future to St. Regis. Are we anticipating keeping that same number, or will that just not be a navigation? It'll just be the whole beds in St. Regis?
So the shelter, the low barrier navigation shelter, would be moved over to St. Regis in a different type of facility more locked facility would be located at White Cell, and it would be expanded at St. Regis to include like emergency services. So instead of being taken to an emergency room, people experiencing homelessness or having a psychiatric or sort of drug-related issue would be taken there, where they would get care specific for their issues, so they're not going to a hospital, which is typically what's happening is people are being diverted to hospitals and jail and hospitals and jail. So these are different interim sort of care solutions that have been developed. So St. Regis would include multiple components like that, and including the Low Barrier Navigation Center, and I believe a supportive housing component as well.
Okay, and you say White Cell, will it not have beds anymore? Or
It will have beds, but it'll be a different type of facility than is there now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Commissioner Patterson.
Thank you, Chair Lowe. So I'm just going to go down the list of the staff recommendations and say which ones that I support. So the general cleanup of the language, I definitely support. I see the need for that, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of those definitions. As far as the SROs, I feel like expanding where they're permitted is a good thing. I think it's going to be great to see it come back to us once those projects are in development, for us to make some more decisions about it. Safe parking, I'm in favor of, if, like with the caveat, right? So I had an experience in a previous residence I lived in Hayward, where we had someone living in their car on the street, and we were told that there was nothing that could be done about that because it would become a residence. And so my hope would be that if we were to do this, that there would then be, that would end, right? So not that, and people still are able to just kind of park in front of someone's house and live there. And so I would support it in that case. And then group homes, I feel like the discussion tonight around group homes was very great, and I don't feel like I have the expertise in that, so I support staff's recommendations and also the recommendations of my fellow commissioners around that. And then as far as shelters and low barrier navigation centers, again, I think that one, I support staff's recommendations, but definitely would just want to see more detail as specific projects come to us around how the regulations are defined for management, and also just costs to the city, which are things I think we could discuss at that time. Thank you.
So from my standpoint, I think I agree that shoring up the definitions is really great, and I'm really excited about that. I think that'll make it easier for everyone, for your staff as well. And so I think that's great, and I support that fully. I understand Commissioner Stevens' concerns that we're relying on the nonprofits to make this work. And that can be challenging, because it's challenging enough when you're dealing with a government agency, and that's one type of entity. But when you're dealing with nonprofits, they all operate differently. They all have different management. They all have different clientele, and it just becomes could become a logistical nightmare to try to regulate all of that. So I understand the concern for sure, and I too am concerned. I think that if we choose to do that, we will need to be very specific as far as the regulations are concerned, and we will need to explore the ways that we are going to enforce whatever regulations we put into place as it relates to managing those facilities. I am concerned as well for the safety of other people who are in the safe parking lots, as well as in the surrounding areas for the safe parking lot. So one big concern I would have is, what do you have to do to get kicked out and not be allowed back in? Because let's face it, it only takes one person to make other people very afraid, or for it actually not to be safe for the people who are in the safe parking lots. And I am positive that since so many of our surrounding cities have already implemented this, we will be able to get a lot of data, and you'll be able to bring back to us a lot of answers to those sorts of questions. So I'm worried today because I don't have the information, but I'm confident that that information will be forthcoming, and I hope it will be. I think that I applaud the staff for paying attention to what is going around us, and for going and contacting the police and fire and making sure that they are on board every step of the way, right from the beginning, all the way through implementation. Because I think if we work collaboratively with our emergency services and all these different agencies, we can actually be successful with these supportive programs. So I am in favor, as long as the information that comes back is favorable to the residents of our city. Are there any other comments? Okay, Commissioner Goodbody.
Thank you, Chair Lowe. I just had one thought. I'm just thinking about Commissioner Stevens' comments about using land use policy to address and remedy a social issue, a very serious social issue. And my thoughts are around that, in that, we have, when a developer comes in and makes a proposal, we offer the option of paying the in lieu fees, or to build inclusive affordable housing. And I'm wondering if maybe there could be some creative, some dialogue or some thoughts around a set aside or a carve out of the funds that come through the pro-housing designation to help support another mental health ambulance. I understand that the fire department has 2 staff members that staff the mental health ambulance to serve all 160,000 residents in Hayward, or to support an EMT at one of the homes that would have people that are transitioning out of substance abuse, or any of the other examples that could help support or help fund those services, so they're not taxing our 911 system, so that when somebody is within those critical 2 minutes after suffering a heart attack, our paramedics and our fire department are there on time. Or if there's somebody that's on the highway that needs immediate assistance, that they're we're diverting our resources to the most critical need. And so that's just a thought that I had, that maybe there's some dialogue that staff can have between now and the next time that this comes to us, about carving out some funds to support our police and fire on that, particularly with the mental health ambulance services.
Yeah, I'll just add a comment. So our community service department is always looking for grant money. They receive grant money and they allocate it to those types of services. So I will pass the message along to our community services department, who's responsible for providing those services.
All right, at this time, I'm going to close commissioner comments on this item, and I would like to thank you again for that great presentation, and thank my fellow commissioners for a robust discussion on that item. Now I'm going to move on to item number 2, which is a public hearing on the City of Hayward's pro-housing designation application. The Planning Commission is being asked to hold a public hearing to accept public comments and provide feedback on the city's pro-housing designation application. Do we have a staff presentation on this item?
Yes, we do. Good evening, commissioners and members of the community. I'm Christina Morales. I'm the Deputy Director of Development Services, and I have before you a presentation on our pro-housing designation application, where we're seeking your feedback and feedback from community members in order to fulfill the requirements of the state's application process. So the pro-housing designation program was established by the state in order to incentivize local jurisdictions to adopt more pro-housing policies. Some of the benefits include ability to apply for their pro-housing program funds, but I think more importantly for the city is it gives priority preference point on various state funding programs. So it improves our competitiveness for things like the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, which Parcel Group 8 just applied for recently. So every point counts in affordable housing applications, so it's very important that we are as the projects located in Hayward are as competitive as possible. To give you a little background, we actually initially submitted this application in December under old regulations, and unfortunately the state was unable to approve the application by the deadline of March 1st, so we had to reapply under the new regulations, which we did in March 8th in order to try to see if we could get those pro-housing designation points for Parcel Group 8 Affordable Housing Project. But as the regulations were new, there were new elements to it, such as this public participation process that we're doing right now, and also compliance with their principles for addressing encampments. So we're working to fulfill those requirements by completing the public engagement process, and we hope to have that completed by the end of July. So the pro-housing application consists of a system of points that evaluate cities based on 4 different categories of housing policy, which include creating housing favorable zoning and land use policies, accelerating housing production timeframes, also reducing construction and development costs, and lastly, providing housing financial subsidies for the development of affordable housing. So based on the criteria established by the state, we estimate that we could potentially score up to 44 points. The minimum threshold to be eligible is 30 points in the program. And I will note that most of the policies that are included in the application are adopted policies. So 22 of the policies are adopted and only 3 of them are proposed policies. So they're items that the city's already taken action on. So part of our public participation process, what we have done is we have set up a website for the project so that the public can provide their comments in written form if they choose. Having this public hearing tonight so they could provide feedback on the application. We will also be holding a homelessness housing task force on July 8th as another opportunity for the community and the task force members to provide feedback. And so that concludes my presentation, and I am available for questions.
Thank you very much. I would open it for commissioner questions. Any commissioners have questions? Commissioner Patterson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Morales. I wanted to say I appreciate just the list of the public outreach that's been done. That's something that I always ask about. And I actually was excited that I received something at my home. I'm a renter. So I was curious if I received that because I'm a planning commissioner or if that actually, if things were strategically also sent to renters, because I didn't really see that listed and I don't know how you maybe would do that. But could you speak a little bit to that?
So we haven't actually done any mailers. We've only done the announcement through the city's newsletter, the Stack. So right now, the only thing we've done are the announcements that would have come through the Planning Commission interest list and also the Homelessness Housing Task Force interest list, the Stack newsletter interest list, and we will be reaching out to all of the community partners and interested parties for the housing element. So if you were on any of those lists, you may have received it for that reason.
So is there any plan to do outreach, though, to also to renters in the future?
I think it is anyone who is on the interested parties list for the previous housing element that they did would be included in that information. I think the challenge we have with this project is most of the policies being adopted is that the feedback is not going to change those adopted policies. But we do want to make the public aware of the application and see if they have any feedback. State suggested that maybe there's things that we're doing and that we didn't recall and that they could hopefully boost our application with additional information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Do I have other commissioners who would like to speak? Okay. I'm going through my notes here. I think we're all frantically looking through our notes. Commissioner Stevens.
Just a quick question. So when the city applies for something like the infill and infrastructure grant, those funds that are used, the work actually has to be done through prevailing wage contractors?
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take a second look through my notes. I'm trying to make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, so one of the questions that was asked before the meeting that I think you answered, but I want to make sure I understand, is there was $9.5 million that the state invested into this program and that was available. Some of that money was given out in 2023 and some was given out in March 2024. Am I right so far?
Not sure on the dates, but yes, there's been 2 rounds of applications so far. The first round, I believe 18 cities were awarded funds, and we're waiting on the results of the current application. We're unsure if there's going to be funding available for the next round, but they are anticipating another one, I think, in the fall.
And that's what we're hoping for, right?
We're hoping for that, and also just to remain competitive for any of the affordable housing, and it looked like also transportation funding programs that the state offers.
Okay. And I believe you said we were looking at if they do grant us part of that 9.5 million, we're assuming we would get right under $1.5 million. Is that correct?
Correct. So the base amount for the jurisdiction our size is $750,000, and then we're awarded $10,000 per point on the application. So if we meet the minimum only at 30 points, then that's an additional $300,000. If we get the full 44 points, then I'd have to do some math in my head, but would put us like over the $1 million threshold.
And I take it the staff believes that even if we don't get any of that money, it's still worth it for the other potential benefits. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I think some of my questions, I think you answered during your presentation, so I just want to go through this briefly. Bear with me for a second, I'm sorry. So some of the things that are, you talked about, like, for example, the ADUs. Have we done studies to make sure that we have enough resources available if we're packing more people into areas that weren't originally intended to have as many people as they'll eventually have?
So that is one of the proposed policies. So that would have additional study that would be done, and also additional stakeholder work that would go along with that particular project. I don't know if, Leah, you have additional information on the ADU program that we're doing is related to I think it was the REAP grant or the LEAP grant?
Yeah, as part of that program, we're looking at working with architects to get pre-approved ADU plans so that somebody can go in and kind of not have to go through the building permitting process, which can take a long time and you don't know who to hire. So it's really just facilitating people to be able to pick up some plans that work for them and pull the permits and build. ADUs are not subject to environmental, they're ministerial, so they're not subject to environmental regulations, and typically only one ADU is allowed per single family lot. So it is an increase in density, but it's a gentle increase. So that's what the state's perspective is on that.
I like the idea of having, maybe two, like you said, the options for plans, and they can just pick one. Yeah. That seems really, really efficient. The question that your comment has spawned for me is, in the staff report, it said that we're trying to go beyond what the state has, go beyond the requirements of the ADU law, and we get 2 points if we do that. And so my question is going beyond the state laws regarding ADUs, is that beneficial for Hayward enough, does it give enough benefit to our city that it's worth the 2 points? You know what I'm saying? Again, I'm worried about resources and safety and those sorts of things. And with only getting 2 points, I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
So the project really is about the pre-approved plans that I just described, and then working with our utility providers to sort of reduce fees or allow them to be paid over time to amortize the fee over a longer period, so somebody doesn't have that big upfront cost. That would be how we'd be going beyond state law. It's not allowing more ADUs than state law allows. That's not the intention of the program that we're looking at.
Thank you so much for clarifying. I appreciate that. So I think I'm probably going to ask something very similar to that one. So it sounds like the way I read it, which could be wrong, is it says we're eliminating minimum, and I'm pointing out attachment 2, page 7, I think it's 7, 1F, eliminating minimum parking requirements for residential development as authorized by the government code and adopting parking ratios less than racial thresholds in the government code, which also gives us 2 points. And so can you maybe explain that a little bit more?
So I think like where we found, as I mentioned before, most of the proposals we have are already adopted policies. So we found areas in our existing zoning that shows where we don't have, we only require, I'm going to get it backwards. We already meet that requirement with the existing zoning because we only require, we don't have a maximum, we have a minimum. Is that correctly?
In the Mission Boulevard form-based code area, there's no minimum parking requirement. There's a maximum. That is exceeding state law in terms of flexibility for parking. And then in the downtown code, it's like 1 parking space per dwelling unit, which also is lower than like what density bonus would require. So in those ways, I guess that's a policy, not a proposed policy or program, but one that we already have that Christina's pointing to and saying, hey, we should get points for this.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And this might be something similar, but page 9, category 2, number 2B, the CEQA analysis will be streamlined. And so I was wondering, is that something that we've already done? Is that another policy that's already enacted that you're talking about as far as the CEQA analysis being streamlined?
And let me check because I can't remember if that was one of the things that we included, because that's the category that you can comply with, but I don't know that it's necessarily what we said we were.
Do you mind reading a little bit more than CEQA will be streamlined? What's before that?
Let me go back. So it's, again, attachment 2. So I've got to find it. Attachment 2, page 9, 2B. So let me go to that.
Yeah, so this we did, it was related to the downtown specific plan that already had its established EIR. So in that way, it establishes and it streamlines the applications that conform with the downtown specific plan. They can use that existing EIR. So
Okay.
once again, another example of, we've looked at what we've already done that exceed the requirements. So leveraging those in order to qualify. And I don't know if it would be helpful if I just identify the projects that are proposed, the 3 ones. I think you named the first one, which was the ADU study that we're doing. And I think in terms of benefiting the community, the benefit would be that if you do have some already available designs, it cuts down on the architecture costs and it makes the project just a little more feasible and less expensive. So it does streamline the ability to create that additional housing. Might be additional housing for your existing family. It might be an additional source of income for your household. So it has the potential to provide that benefit. And then just stalling so that I can get to the right place. And then the other one, I believe, is the looking at the universal design and considering if there's a way that we can have requirements related to universal design as new projects are proposed so that the units are more universally acceptable to people of all abilities. So that is the other project. And then the last one is escaping my memory. Oh, I do believe it's the tiny home project, which while we have entitled the project, we actually are looking to provide some subsidy to the project so that we provide operating revenue so that the project could be maintained. And so while we have it kind of on our list, once the project gets built, we would fund it. It's not a completed project yet. So those are the three proposed policies that are not actually something the city's already doing.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go through a couple more things just to make sure I don't have any other questions. Give me 1 second. Oh. No, I think that's all I had. Did any other planning commissioners have any questions? Okay, Commissioner Goodbody.
Thank you, Chair Lowe. I just had, was curious about item 1J, the establishment of a workforce housing opportunity zone, or the housing sustainability district. If you could distinguish those, or if they're different names, the same thing but different names.
So I think that's one of the categories that we're not proposing points on. You said 1J?
It was just 1 point, I think, that you assigned to it.
I signed
Yeah,
it.
so it's lower on the, in terms of the points value, but
Do you, I think.
it's page 8 of 45.
8 of 45. Yeah, so all of these ones at the beginning are the descriptions of what the criteria is. So on page 8, this is the description of the category that the state is saying we could score points in.
I see.
And then starting on page, sorry, it's a big application. Starting on page 17 is where the actual programs are that the city is saying that how we're qualifying for. So that first section on page 17 are all of the city's proposed policies.
Got it, yeah.
And then starting on page 19 are looks like a blank page to me. Starting on page 20 are all of the adopted policies that the city has in place. So we don't score points in all of the categories that the state proposed, but we found the ones that we would qualify for points for.
Got it.
Any other commissioners have any questions? Ms. Fung, do we have any public comments at this time?
There are none.
Hearing that there are none, I'm going to go ahead and close public comments at this time and open it up for commissioner comments. Do we have any commissioners who would like to comment on this item? Commissioner Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a few comments. So the first is just acknowledging that a resolution was already passed by City Council around this. So even though some things I may not be totally in agreement with, I get that this is something that we're moving forward with. I do want to, just to my previous question around outreach to renters, I do feel like when we're talking about affordable housing, some of the people who may actually benefit from that the most are people who rent. And so that's why I feel like that's a really key target group to talk to about these things. And I do understand the difficulty of reaching renters and how the multiple means like the stack and those things are the effort probably to do that. But I would recommend potentially doing more social media outreach or more flyering if possible, just using addresses, especially some of the larger like apartment complexes and things, because we want the people who potentially would be impacted by this the most to have the information that they need and be able to give their input. Similar to one of Chair Lowe's questions, my concern with this and why I brought up that I get that it's already, that we're moving forward with it, is I'm just wondering about the cost benefit. So thank you for answering my question around the actual base grant amount to Hayward and what that would look like, and thank you for explaining how the points would contribute to that. $1 million around that area is still not very much money for what we're doing. And so I'm really wondering, what the benefit really is to the city of doing this. And I get that we anticipate that there could be some in the future, but there was one mention in the section around creating housing favorable zone and land use policies where the state density bonus law was mentioned, and I bristle anytime state density bonus law even comes up. And so I feel like we already have a lot of regulations that are impacting our ability to make decisions for the city. So I just really feel very cautious, even though I know that this is moving forward, just about what the actual benefit is to the city. And so that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you. So I'm in support of this because the state is holding the city hostage for getting funding that's drastically needed to clean up the city. Again, there's nobody listening, nobody commenting, nobody here. We're making decisions about what will affect the form of this city for the next 100 years, and nobody cares. But when these things start going to place and people start getting very unhappy and angry, people are going to come and they're going to complain and they're going to want answers. So if I was the city council, I'd start listening, and I think everybody in this city should be writing our state assembly district representative and our Senate district representative and basically saying, we want local control back and this is not okay. There has to be some middle ground about getting housing built, but also giving us some local control. So thank you.
Anyone else want to make a comment? I have a couple of comments I wanted to make. I really liked, again, in the attachment to page 9, 2L, I really liked the establishment of a one-stop shop permitting processing or a single point of contact where entitlements are coordinated across city approval functions. It seems like a much more efficient way of doing things, and I just wanted to compliment staff on that. And I hope there is a really great concrete plan, or not plan, but I hope that the need organizations and departments are working well together, is all I'm saying, to accomplish that streamlined process, because it sounds like it could be really, really helpful. Also, I would like to go to page 32 in attachment to 4B, and Hayward Municipal Code 10-17 .415 establishes an affordable housing trust fund funded through payments of the affordable housing in lieu fee. And the city has allocated $4.4 million from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, incentivizing the development of 349 affordable units to lower income housing. And it was really, I thought it was good to see exactly what's going on with those in lieu fees that we hear about all the time. We've heard public comments where people have had very strong opinions about those in lieu fees, but knowing that there will be 340, is that something that's already happened or something that's in the works?
Most of the projects are under construction. One of them just finished construction, is completely leased. Two of them are currently in the process of leasing up. And then the third one is still in the pre-development. I guess the fourth one in the pre-development phase.
So that sounds really good to me, that we are using those in lieu fees for the purpose that we thought they were being used for or should be used for. So I just, again, wanted to compliment staff on that. And do we have any other commissioner comments? All right, so seeing as there's no action to be taken on this item, I am going to close this item and move on to approval of minutes. Do we have any questions or comments about that, or any motions?
I motion to approve the minutes.
Any second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any comments about the motion? May we please have a roll call vote? Ms. Fung?
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Commissioner Goodbody,
Yes.
Commissioner Franco-Clausen,
Yes.
Commissioner Patterson,
Aye.
Commissioner Myers,
Yes.
Chair Lowe.
Yes. And the motion passes, and with 5 yeas and 0 noes, or nays. And so the minutes of April 11th, 2024 are approved. And let's move on to commissioner reports. Do we have any commissioner reports or any reports from staff?
Just to say that this is our last meeting until the recess. And then, there will be a recess from July through the beginning of August, and the next meeting scheduled is August 22nd. And we'll let you know, Alicia will be in touch to check in and see if you're available if we have items that are on the agenda. So have a good summer. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you, staff, for all your hard work throughout the year. We really appreciate it, and we certainly couldn't do our job if you guys didn't do such a great job of doing your job. So we really appreciate you, and I really appreciate my fellow commissioners and all the hard work that I know you guys put into this. I did want to take a moment and just compliment the City Council on a wonderful Juneteenth celebration on Saturday. I thought it was a great representation. A lot of people were out enjoying the sunshine, enjoying the festivities, and we just really represented Hayward well. So thank you to all of those people who put that together. It was excellently orchestrated and executed, and it was just a good time. So I couldn't not acknowledge Juneteenth and acknowledge how Hayward celebrated Juneteenth this year. Any other commissioners have anything else they want to bring up? Commissioner Franco-Clausen.
I just wanted to share that I will be hosting National Night Out on Sleepy Hollow in our little community, really talking about some of the programs. So some of the departments said they'll get me some literature to share with my neighbors. So I just want to commend you for your work. And if you guys want to stop by on August 7th, we'll be hosting that.
Yeah, I love National Night Out. It's always a great night. I look forward to it every year. So without further ado, I am going to call the meeting adjourned at 8:33. Thank you.